This video is about the competitive environment, so thinking about what affects levels of competition in a market and how businesses might respond to any changes in competition. Competition is a really critical part of business because if there's just one or even a small handful of firms in a market, they can start to really do what they like. They're likely to charge much higher prices, there's little incentive for competition or for them to be productive and efficient. And so generally speaking, we need a number of firms competing with each other to make markets function much more effectively. But it's not necessarily that straightforward to judge the level of competition in a market. So we might look out for a few different factors in thinking about how competitive a market actually is. And first and foremost, we'd look at the number and the size of the firms. So generally speaking, the more firms there are, the more competitive a market is because all those firms will be competing with each other for customers. In markets where there's a small number of large firms, then they can start to dominate any smaller firms in the market. But there can be situations where there's quite intense competition between those small number of large firms. So we might also look to the intensity of the rivalry between the firms. Are they really competing with each other, or are they what we call colluding with each other and working together in order to try and keep both of the individual businesses' profits up, sometimes at the expense of consumers? A really critical factor is the level of barriers to entry in an industry. And what we mean by that is how easy it is for new firms to enter the market. So those barriers can include things like the cost of setting up, the brand loyalty to current brands, and sometimes there are legal barriers which might stop new firms from moving into a market as well. So if you think about the market for pharmaceuticals, the cost of research and development in that industry is so high, and there are a number of laws and regulations to do with the development of drugs as well, which means that there are a relatively small number of really big firms in that market, and there's not that much competition or new competition coming into that market. We might also look at the level of product differentiation. So businesses really try to reduce competition in their market by differentiating their products and making themselves stand out from competitors. If all products in a market are really similar, then that's going to make that market much more competitive because consumers can just look across all of those products, all of them being quite similar, and pick out the cheapest of them. There might also be a difference between what we'd call price competition and non-price competition. So very often businesses are going to compete on price. They're going to undercut each other and try and get customers that way by offering deals and offering the best possible price to their customers. But also they might compete in other ways as well, which we would call non-price competition. So they might keep their prices relatively similar and then compete through advertising and trying to attract customers with the best adverts. They might compete using things like customer service and after sales service and the quality of their products and trying to get more customer loyalty in that way. So you can see there's a really huge range of factors that affect the level of competition in a market. And it's not just as straightforward to say that a market is competitive or it's not. But what's really probably most critical to businesses is to think about how they could respond to the threat of increased competition, because many businesses fail because another one comes into their market and does things better than them and then takes their customers as a result of that. So probably the simplest, most straightforward response to new competition in a market is to think about cutting prices. And we should know from our work on price elasticity of demand, PED, that products for which demand is price elastic, these price cuts are going to have the biggest effect on stimulating demand for these kinds of products. They might also look at a specific policy of predatory pricing, which is a pricing strategy of setting prices even below cost to try and knock a new competitor out of the market and be able to retain that market share. But businesses might decide that actually cutting prices isn't necessarily going to be the best strategy. possibly because demand is more price inelastic and they don't think they're going to get the additional demand as a result of cutting those prices. So in those sorts of situations, they might look at greater levels of product differentiation. And there's a range of ways in which they could do that. They could look at their product design and try and improve that. They could spend on big marketing campaigns to try and convince customers that they're still the best business and bring more brand loyalty as a result of that. Or they could think about their USP, their unique selling point, and really carefully think about how they're standing out from that competition. Now, we mentioned just previously that when businesses work together, it's called collusion. And in many forms, that's actually not legal, but there are still ways in which they might try to do this, so to avoid both of the businesses making losses as a result of competing with each other. And at the most extreme end of this, you might see takeovers and mergers between businesses. So many large businesses do this if they see a small competitor coming into their market which they think might threaten their dominance in the future. That is a really clear strategy that at quite an early stage they might try and take over that competitor to remove that threat of competition coming in the future.